Hello, everybody, and hi, Sonia. Sonia Lucina. How
Hey
are you?
Dan! Doing great. How are you?
Good. Long time no chat. We haven't chatted in like 6 months, 8 months. We're just randomly showing up on this.
Nobody believes that.
We're just gonna sort of like catch up, and everyone's gonna listen, and it's gonna be great. It's. I think we really meant to call this the real world with Dan and Sonia.
Next one. I like that one. I should take a note.
Yes, we're inventing and coming up with ideas. I see a few people coming in live, so good to see everybody. Sean, it looks like good to see you again. You were at our event in Chicago, our Question Pro
Oh,
Radical
so
event. So
fun.
good to see you joining us. Um, and Gia, I see you just come on. Thank you. Gia is the genius behind the marketing and the beautiful colors and the advertising and just a general amazing human being. So thank you for joining us as well. So how are you? How are things? What's the highlight of your start with the highlight of your week?
Oh my goodness. The highlight of my week is that last night I thought it was Friday night.
Well, all right. Shall we
So I
explore
know.
that?
Why? Why? So, I got together one of my priorities that I'm working on, work in progress, is to spend more time with friends. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a mom. I'm an organizational psychologist. I run a business unit, and I'm a mom of a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old's like the newest thing, right? I've been an organizational psychologist for a little bit over 20 years, working since I was, I don't know, 14. And so I'm least experienced being a mom. And so a big part of that is for me still trying to find time for friends. And all my life, I've been surrounded by these amazing, inspirational people from all different backgrounds. And last night, I got together with a few girlfriends. One of them was visiting from Brazil. And so we got around and we had this just incredible chat that's actually very timely for our conversation today. And just to give you some background, so I live in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm originally from Serbia. And the girlfriends that I was sitting here with, one was from Bosnia, Hawaii, US, and Venezuela. So imagine all geographies, different professions. I would say probably the only thing we have kind of similar is we're like similar ages. I think it's like within plus or minus 10 years. And that I have not laughed like that in a while. I have not been seen like that in a while. I haven't felt like just so incredibly inspired and proud of my friends for everything who they are. And we had a conversation around what was your highlight of the year and what was your low light of the year. And so I would say for this week, a lot has happened. Like I said, I thought today was Saturday. I thought last night was Friday night. A lot happened in 2 days. But it just reminded me how powerful it is to be, around the people that you love, around the people that look at the world in different ways and just again have these like hugely incredible experiences. And we talked about work, we talked about families, we talked about love, I mean everything. Like I think in like 4 hours, which is probably longest we've been together in a while. But what about you, Dan? Look at rocking into like midday Wednesday. What's the highlight of your week?
Well, I love that, and thank you. I was going to ask you to quickly, for those listening and watching who didn't know who you were. So thank you for that and that story of hanging out with friends. And I always love when that happens, when you just kind of unexpectedly or plan to get together with people you haven't seen in a while. And sometimes when you're required to talk about what's going on in your life, it also makes you recognize a little bit more what's going on in your life because you're living it, but when you have to actually explain it, or you're questioned about certain things, then you kind of have to put it in context a little bit more. So um, I did know it was Wednesday this morning, which was good. It's just been, sometimes I do feel like it's Friday, or even worse, if I wake up on a Monday and I think it's Saturday. That's never a good thing, but that doesn't happen too often. For those who don't know me, I'm the co-founder of Radical, and at a high level, what we believe at Radicals, we believe in making work epic for everybody. Um, that's what I'm committed to doing. I wake up every morning passionate about that. So today, Sonia and I were chatting about, I guess like we all do towards the end of the year, it's a moment of reflection. And and every year, I think it's an opportunity to take inventory on the work that we've done, stuff we're proud of, stuff that we need to do a little better. And it's also a reminder that, life's continuing to move, right? So the title of this, it wasn't meant to be scary. Don't want me to say life is short. It's meant to actually be exciting, like seize the moment, um, and and make sure every day you are setting your soul on fire with the people you love, the friends you surround yourself around, the people you decide to be committed to from a relationship standpoint, your family and work. Right? I mean, if we can all just truly love what we do, just a little bit more, then it's going to be a better day, and our souls will be more fulfilled. So, so Sonia, I know you and I continue to chat, and we stay in touch about a lot of work things, but we also check in with each other. And I know for both of us this year, we've been doing some discovery and just self work on ourselves. Um, so and we're never, and perfection is never to be achieved, nor would we kid ourselves to think that. But what are some of the things that you wouldn't mind sharing, just
Yeah.
on your journey, and things that you've been recognizing and working on and focusing on?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. And I think for me, I always love to share that because a few minutes before we jumped on, Dan and I were, chatting and recapping. And I was talking about the conversation with my girlfriends and how a lot of times just knowing somebody else's perspective and what they're going through and how they're approaching things puts our own life in perspective and gives us ideas and ways to maybe think differently. And so for me, I'll share a little bit of personal and a little bit of professional. And part of what, inspired our time together today is at one point a couple weeks ago, I thought about this year. And I don't know about all of you that are, on Instagram or different social media, but I started getting those recaps of like, you know,
Mm.
the with the like music montage and people like jumping out of airplanes and like finishing marathons and winning beauty pageants. And I was like, I did none of that. None of that. And I thought, what did I do this year? And I was like, wow, like, in my life, like I mentioned, I had a child, I have a partner, I finished my PhD, I got an MBA. Like, there were these big milestones. And I thought, was there something this year? And then I thought, wait, at the beginning of this year, I remember talking to my therapist and saying, wow, I did a lot of work. I did a lot of work on my mental well-being, physical well-being. And when I say it's work, it was work. It's not like, oh, I just, meditated and everything cleared up. Like I had tough conversations. I had tough conversations with those around me, with myself. And entering into the year, I remember telling her, I want to take some time and celebrate that. And this year, I just want to enjoy all of those things that foundationally I worked so hard on and enjoy that piece. And Dan, you mentioned perfectionism, and oh boy, that's one of mine. Excellence over perfectionism, excellence. So, still repeating that. It's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
But in that sense, when I reminded myself of that, I thought, good for me. And good for me for doing yoga all the mornings I could. Not every morning because I couldn't, but being consistent when I could show up and giving myself self compassion and grace when I couldn't. And what was interesting is that personally, because I thought I had such a good year of that, I remember one morning I was getting ready for work and listening to some, music. I think it's like good mood music on Spotify or something like that and jamming. And I just got this overwhelming feeling of next year, I want to make a big mark. This year, I wanted to ride it out. I wanted to enjoy the peace and all the work. And I thought, wow, I'm ready. Now, what that is, I don't know yet. I'm still trying to decide where to channel all that passion and drive, but that really built up in me. And from a professional standpoint, I actually was thinking about when I was even younger in my career. So I work on employee continuous listening and surveys, and goodness, for an organizational psychologist and someone who's, lived all over the world, it's my dream job to figure out how to ask people things for them to feel seen and heard and help organizations work with that data. And this year, from a work standpoint, we rebuilt a lot of things. We made things better, we made things stronger, we made things more powerful. And that to me again, and I think this was coincidentally that I worked on that personal and professional foundation, because I've been around long enough to know when you have that, building on top of it is so much easier. When you have something that's a shaky foundation, it's not as easy. And you're always kind of waiting to see, like, is something going to drop and how are things going to move ahead? And I remember earlier in my career, and I don't know if Mary Delaney made it on, she's like one of my favorite humans, and she was my first leader at CareerBuilder. We were working on a platform, and I was showing up to work every weekend. At the time, we were like printing out reports, and I was making sure things were aligned. And at the time, we had quarterly performance reviews, and she said, "Okay, like, I think you did okay this quarter, like, exceeds expectations, but not like wildly exceeds." And I was like, "But I worked so hard, I put in so many hours, like, you're kidding me." But you will know what, next quarter, and a quarter had caught on fire. And all that work, all that foundation paid off 100-fold. And
Mm,
so that, from a career standpoint, I started to realize, I get it. Like, there are gonna be times that we're gonna have to put in all this work for it to just all of a sudden blossom. And so, there's some things that I'm very much professionally looking forward to in the next year. But before we look ahead to next year, Dan, I'd love for you to share your year with our listeners.
yeah. Well, thank you for all of that. I mean, it's funny. I'm sure we're all asked, um, the hypothetical questions in life, like, well, what, especially the older we get, like, what was the best age, and if you could go back and experience a time in your life, when would it be, um, and why? And I like to ask that question of in kind of in-person sessions too. And when I'm asked that question, I can honestly say, and I'm not just saying this, and it hasn't always been the case. There's been moments when I've said I'd like to go back 5 years, but right now, like, this is the time. Like, I love life right now. I'm lucky. I'm healthy. I went bald 25 years ago, so that was easy. I started going gray 15 years ago, so I haven't, physically, I don't really change. And um, and I'm hungry to continue to make an impact. I will admit to everyone that I think, even as a kid, a blessing and a curse. I always wanted. It was important to me to create something, whether it was in leaving a song behind or music. And I always would sit in bed or lay in bed when I was a young kid and think about, like, this idea of forever, and knowing that I wasn't going to be around forever, and, like, well, what does even, like, forever look like or feel like? And it would actually give me anxiety, because you can't even imagine it. Like, what does that even, like? I couldn't. So I like struggled with that. But then thinking, but what if we make change while we're here? What if we impact somebody, uh, um, or inspire someone through whatever it is that we do? Right? It doesn't. You don't have to be a film director or a musician. It's just those little things that we all do, leaving something behind, changing the trajectory of somebody's life. Man, that's leaving something behind. And so I continue to live and feel that and breathe that. And this year, past 2 years, and starting another company, I'm radical, and over the last year, I'm bringing in just some incredible people, surrounding myself with just brilliant minds, great human beings, and the partners that we have, like Question Pro and you, Sonia. I mean, this just makes it fun. So for me, it's a lot of work, and I feel like I've sort of, I don't know, rolled up my sleeves, going back in time a little bit, but I've chosen this path because I do want to continue make change and make impact. And I want to do it with people around me that believe in what I believe. So it's been and personally, I would say a lot of ups and downs, but I'm extraordinarily happy. And there's been, new people in my life, and I'm a very happy and satisfied human right now, and ready to take on something big too. So that's why I think when we started talking about, well, 2024 needs to be, well, let's talk about that. And what does that mean in the context of work? And what does that
Yeah.
mean in the context of employee experience? I mean, how do we sort of, drive this motivation of wanting to achieve and you be incredible and passionate about what you do? How do we do that in the workplace? And what are some of the changes in the trends in a year that is going to be noisy? Like,
Mhm.
talk about this in a little bit, but like 2024 will be a turbulent year. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's going to be a bad year whatsoever. It just means there's going to be a lot going on.
Yeah, well, if anything, the last few years, I think, have prepared us for that. I think we're, like, ready to chill, but at some point, it's like, "Well, this is just how it's gonna be, like, let's go." And I think you're right, and I think that's in one of our conversations, we talked about there's so many tough things happening in the world, and sometimes I question, like, do I dare be optimistic? Do I dare try to go and say, things are great and do all these, try to stay really positive and talk about positive things when there is a lot of suffering. And I know, you had said like, hey, there are things that you can control and there are things you can't. And there's always has to be a place for us to stay optimistic and for us to look for a way to make a positive impact and for us to be okay hurting and understanding everything that's going on. But if every time we're just internalizing all of that and not trying to find a better way, we'll lose ourselves and we'll lose as a humanity. And that really resonated with me because even, as I wake up some days and I'm like, today's gonna be a good day, and then I'll get a message and it's like, oh man, like, but come on, I just woke up. Like, can it wait? Like, and sometimes it's big bad news and sometimes it's little bad news, but it's just taking it all in and putting it in perspective and understanding where we can make that difference, but still trying to find that place where we can make a difference and where we can show up. And like I was saying before, like when we need to rest, also being okay with that because I
Yeah.
love making the world a better place, but we need to take care of ourselves first and foremost before we can really do that, before we can show up as our best selves to do the
Yeah.
best what's for others. And so I think to me, for anyone that's listening to us, for you to do your own reflection and think about what it is that you want, both professionally, personally next year. And it's okay for you not to want it to be big. Maybe what's going to set your soul on fire is yoga. Like it set my soul on fire this year. It is time with your family and it's time resting and putting yourself first. And I just want to make sure people are okay with that because, again, sometimes we're surrounded by so many people that achieve these incredible things, and speaking as a human and as a psychologist, sometimes it's hard not to feel like, did I do enough? And should I? And could I? And just remembering that it's okay not to. So that's one message as we, talk about these big things and wanting to change the world, that if you're not feeling it today, that's totally okay. But I think that's the most important part for all of us to see, where we are and where our energy is. And, hopefully there's always going to be next year and next month. And the end of the year, it's a nice time for a reset, but it's not the only time, right? That's why we do quarterly planning, monthly planning, weekly planning to allow ourselves, yeah, right, for flexibility. You wake up and you're like, what's this day gonna bring? It doesn't have to be just by a year. So also to remember that too. So Dan, looking ahead to next year, what are you thinking? What are you most excited about?
There's well, I guess there's so much. So personally, I'm just excited about continuing down the path and the journey of what I'm creating, working on, staying engaged, staying busy. Um, but but I guess I want to continue to do everything I can to be optimistic and you know, as we think about 2024 and we talk about wanting to make a big impact and big changes, about leadership and just people in the workplace, I mean, what would you recommend, um, I mean, how do you juggle and prioritize so much going on within work itself and within personal life and work life? Because that's continuing to be a challenge. And our data tells us this, and your data, I'm sure, tells you something very, very similar, right?
Yeah.
There is a hunger for clarity. There's a hunger for meaning. We know there's a hunger for connection. So how do we start to truly drive that behavior change, without just throwing more tech tools and niceties out out into
Yeah.
the atmosphere?
Oh, what a big question. It actually like made me a little emotional even thinking about it. So I think there are a few things. I think the first one, and boy, is this not necessarily an easy one to operationalize, but I think is trust. And so a lot of what I've researched this year, a lot of what I've spoken with our clients about, is where do you work? What hours? Workforce flexibility, hybrid, remote, what does that look like? And I do believe it 100% comes down to trust. Maybe not in all cases, of course, some jobs are it's difficult to be remote. But in other cases, it's concern around productivity. It's a concern about relationship building. But I've been so fortunate to have worked by large and far for organizations and for people who trusted me and for people who gave me that ability to have the autonomy to find a way that I can juggle things on my terms. And those terms are big. My parents are in Serbia. My friends are all over the world. My family is all over the world, and I love them and they're so important to me. I have a lot of friends. How do I manage to keep those relationships? And I think if you in all aspects of your life can have that flexibility comes with it because a person's not concerned around what are you doing every moment and how are you managing. And I think, when you mentioned the connections and relationships, I think that's going to be huge in the workplace. And that's
Yes.
something else that I've researched recently is that, I mean, my goodness, most of us as organizations are, like you were saying, are going to go through tough things. We will.
Yeah.
How do we handle that? And how do we handle that it's not only up to the CEO, that's not only up to the top leadership, but every one of us on our teams as peers, how well are we supporting each other? How much are we showing up for each other? How much are we creating that? Because I would tell you, in the thousands and thousands of open-ended comments that I have read, there is
Mhm.
so much passion, there's so much emotion around people we're surrounded with. And so for organizations to continue to ask about that and continue to think about how do we build those connections? And I mean, I knew you for how long before we ever met in person? Like a year, like a couple of years probably.
It's a year, probably a year and a half,
Yeah,
maybe.
like I think I've
Yeah.
seen you 4 times in my life. Plus,
Yeah.
like, right? Like, that's it. That's it, but for anyone that sees our faces together, they probably think like, "Oh, these guys grew up together. They probably went to school," like, whatever that is. And so
Yeah.
for us to continue to challenge, like, what's conventional and what's unconventional, but not like, I think sometimes people are so fixated on the how before they think about the what and the why. And it's not to reprimand them, like, sometimes we're programmed like that, but I just hope that this year, like, we remember what's important and challenge the way that we get to it. Like,
I love that, and, I love that you brought up our example of friendship and connection, and because and some data some research we did with you, told us that about 80% of people in North America do not work in a co-located situation. So meaning, 8 out of 10 people are remote or hybrid, and they don't get to meet each other in person. And, and so and we do, connection and that feeling of just and trust. How do you build those things? This is a little more of a hypothetical question, but I don't think we have time to get into all the psychology behind this. But how do you build that over time in the new world of work that is predominantly moving,
no.
work and teams that are located in some cases all around the globe,
Yeah.
right? So it's not, and you have to take the time to truly get to know each other. And like you said, we haven't, and even when we've spent time together, we're at conferences, we're working, we're busy, we get a
Yeah.
little, but most of our relationship and friendships is actually, grown just through conversations and taking time and working together. And so like we're a good example of it. Yeah, it can be done, right? You
Yeah.
can build trust and you can build connection. You can build an incredible working relationship and friendship, in a remote way. But it does take time and it takes effort. Yeah, and it takes prioritization.
Yeah.
So I think
And
that's yeah.
yeah, and sometimes it takes help. Like I remember even on my team, I'm always in meetings, like not a badge of honor for anyone that heard that. But I love spending time with people. I love connecting. And so my calendar tends to be full. And some of my work really requires collaboration. And I'm a relatively outgoing person. Over the years, I became that. And so I don't have a problem reaching out to people. Well, guess what? That's not everybody. And for me, even as somebody who knew that, when I looked at some of our survey data of our team, people expressed saying, like, I feel a little bit isolated. I thought, oh, I had no clue. And I
Yeah.
didn't even necessarily think to ask because my experience was so different. So I thought, well, clearly everybody knows each other. And to me, as a leader of that team, it made me take a step back and say, how do I help people connect more effectively? And how do I make sure that that works for them? Because that's what I think a lot of times happens, especially for us that are managing different people. And so, with the best intentions, we assume that everyone's having similar experience as we are. And everyone has a similar way of communicating, connecting, knowing. And that could not be farther from the truth from all of us. Like all of us have different experiences, whether we're peers, however long we've been in an organization, what our level is. And so I think that again, to just take the time and understand that, like, where is the connection working? And it might not be, oh, we're just going to have a bunch of meetings, but nobody's talking. Nobody, okay, well, why don't you two meet individually? If you live in the same city, maybe go have a coffee. Like you kind of encourage people, you give ideas and suggestions because they might not come up with them on their own. But that's again the power of asking, right? Like it's very hard to know what somebody is going through. And of course, in like survey, because that's what I do for a living, you can have a conversation. You can do it in your one-on-one. There's a lot of different ways to ask things. I recommend surveys. They're, at scale and all that. However, there are other ways to do
Good little plug there. Yes, surveys are good.
It's gonna be a big year next year.
Well, I forgot now. It was
I made you laugh too hard. You lost your thought.
is yeah, the critical part of I think navigating connection and just getting to know someone in a different way. And I think I a big part of that I've found in connecting, and we talked about it like being I've talked about the difference between being connected with someone and building connections, right?
Yeah.
Connections are you truly get to know someone, what makes them tick, who they are as a person, and to do that, that does take time, and you have to listen, right? There's an art to listening, and to anyone out there listening to us right now, well, you just mentioned one-on-ones, and I urge everybody, and the data is loud and clear on this, the importance of having conversations with your manager and your direct reports, or even just colleagues that you work with on some regular basis. Even if there isn't necessarily work to talk about, don't let that be an excuse to say, well, we can just cancel it. Like,
Oh yeah.
that's the worst. That is the number one killer in connection is not following through with just a conversation, whether it's in person or whether it's virtual. I mean, that is critical. That's just human beings being human beings. And I know it sounds basic for everyone to hear this, but it's done. We do that a lot. I think we say, well, we're caught up on work. We're pretty good. Projects are on track. I'm like, great. Fantastic. So now you have an incredible opportunity to actually ask
Yeah.
questions. what did you do yesterday? I'm curious. How are you feeling? Like, and share as much about yourself as you want to share. And that's how connections, true, authentic connections are built. And that is when we talk about sort of really building a people first, human centric workplace. It is about that. It's about promoting those sort of conversations because that builds trust. The more I know
Yeah.
about you, the more I will trust you. And then the more I will trust you, across a team that we're working on. So I think,
Yeah.
these are subtleties, but they're critically important
Yeah.
subtleties.
Oh, absolutely. And I have like now, like as you're saying, I'm like, I have this data I need to analyze. And I haven't had a chance to yet. Next week. There's always next week. But I would say like so my hypothesis, and if you anyone want to check in with me after, let me know, is that the stronger connections, maybe there's even studies out there already. The stronger connections you have with people, the higher your productivity is and the higher output. Why? Because there's more involved, right? Like to me, even anecdotally when I talk with my team, like everyone really cares. And not only do they care about our business, but they care about each other. It's like if somebody asks me for something, I'm going to get it to them because I know it's important to them in their work. And like the last thing I would ever want is to make them late, make them look bad. You talked about juggling personal and professional life. And my goodness, is that an art and a science every day?
Yeah.
Every day, I think I got this figured out. And it's like, well, oh, haven't encountered that one yet. Like, what do I do? But when you have people that really care for you beyond just being a person on their team that is responsible for X, people show up completely differently. They do because they want to be there for you. And so I think in a lot of traditional ways, we thought about like connections at work and relationships and all of that is like, oh, it's nice, like it's great. And if you have a best friend or work or whatever, but it's not just about retention. I think it just has this ripple effect in absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. And so for organizations that are thinking about productivity, that are thinking about going into next year and like, what in the world do I do? Because I'm going to continue have to do more with less. Like maybe I don't have to do layoffs, but I'm guessing for most of us, our targets just got higher going into next year, like our goals, our mission for what we want to do. And hopefully we don't have to lay anyone off, but maybe we don't have huge plans of hiring. And so, how do I accomplish more with what I have? When you have passionate people who believe in the purpose, who are connected with each other, that's how you do it. And how do you know if you have it? You have to ask, like you just do. And then you have to help people get there. I think it's this huge connection. I think it's interesting to me because I believe more and more people are bought into the idea of it. There's still an opportunity on how do we execute it effectively, right? How do we make sure that we measure it and we know where people are feeling really strong, where there's an opportunity, and when there's an opportunity, what do I do, and how do I
Yes.
make that a priority?
Yeah. Well, and the what do I do and how do I prioritize it is key, right? I always joke, I don't, well, not really a joke. I bring it up, and anyone working in the kind of the people work tech space, whether you're on the advisory, consulting, technology side, like everything that we do, everything, point of doing it is to inspire behavior change.
Mhm.
Why else do we do it? Just to get data on what is? Great. That's not why we do it. We want to understand what is so we can start to adjust. And how do
Yeah.
we adjust things? People have to change. And why do people change? Because it has to be a better experience for them when they do, if they do. And that
Yeah.
takes connection. And so, and that is, but it is easy to fall back into old habits. And you and I started off this conversation talking about the work that we've been doing, um, and it is hard sometimes to recognize things that you need to do, and start to do them. And it's easy to just fall back and and skip a yoga class, like you said, just because.
Yeah.
But it's a small example, but it's important. Like it's all relative to the individual. Like
Yeah.
whatever we important to ourselves, do it. Go do it. Like if
Yeah.
that's on fire, go do it and be consistent with it. Right. That's the other thing
Mhm.
about the other day, just that consistency of small things repeated over and over again, and that ultimately does drive behavior change,
Yeah.
especially if things. So,
Absolutely. That's when you start to see the positive benefits, and that's when you know something is good for you, and then it's a little different when you start to really feel it. Like, in theory, like, I have this, like, huge bottle of water. I know it's good for me, but, oh, all of a sudden now when I don't drink enough water in a day, I can feel it, and I'm like, "Oh, now I'm really getting it." Where probably for years I was reading it, I knew I didn't prioritize it, but it wasn't until I started to do it and then slipped that I really realized that impact. And so I do think that that's a big thing too, to your point, like when you're consistent, you start to understand the benefits. It's easier to stick to it. And again, sometimes the grace, like I was laughing again with my friends last night, like recently I got the Aura ring just, to see like, am I sleeping as bad as, as I think I am? And like everyone, like I kid you not, every time, of course, because like going to sleep consistently is, what you need to do. Every time I hang out with my friends or do something out of the ordinary, I wake up the next day and like the app is like, "Are you okay?" Like, "I'm great. I'm great. Like I didn't sleep well, but it was for a good reason. Like I'll catch up tomorrow." But it's
yeah,
also, like, understanding yourself, those balances, but, like, you better believe it, probably tonight I'm going to bed at 8:30. Like, I'm getting this train back on the tracks. But
yeah,
yeah, it is consistency, it's learning yourself, and then it's understanding those positive benefits of the efforts that are gonna keep you moving forward, and it's prioritizing, right? There's not I think as businesses, as we go into next year, I think you mentioned earlier the why. And so when I think when it comes to culture, when it comes to the people, understanding what we really want to do and why we want to do it, and then continuing to remind ourselves of that, because without fail, it is going to be hard. It is going to be a year that's we're going to face different challenges, and we're not going to have a ton of resources, and we won't have a ton of budget, but it doesn't mean that it stops us from looking to do the right thing. And I think if we have that, I know I'm doing this because of this, and I know I'm going to get resourceful, and I know I will stick to it because I so fully believe in that why. That's what's gonna motivate us, and then, of course, measuring as much as understanding and reminding how that's going, but I think that's it's gonna be so critical to keep those motivations, much like in the last few years, right? It's not been an easy few years. It's not like we're coming from thriving global economies and no pandemic ever happened, like, a lot of really big stuff happened, so that's why I was like, I think we're kind of ready for it.
yeah. I mean, I think so, and I hope so. And I was gonna, ask you sort of your final thoughts and predictions, which I think you just
I got ahead of you.
kind of mic drop. It was great, and I completely agree. I do think, um, I think there's a reason why stuff feels noisier, and there's always and it feels harder, and it's because of the input that we all have now and the real time nature of news and social media and stuff that it's just it's really hard to exist, right, and with all of that noise and trying to figure out what's right and truth from fact to fiction and all the above. But wiping that aside, in the US, as those in the US who are listening know, that there'll be an election next year, and I am talking about this because regardless of who wins, this is not a political conversation. Because there is such divide, there will be a large subset of people who are angry, right? Who don't agree, because it isn't just like, well, all right, there's a lot of overlap. There isn't a lot of overlap. There should be. I actually believe there's more overlap than we think. We just don't allow ourselves to see it. That's another podcast. I think we all want the same thing for the most part. But we just have just painfully different ways of how we're going to get there. So with the uncertainty of the economy, which you brought up, the political, I'll call it a little bit of chaos. The word empathy is going to be more important than it's ever been. Truly, truly, and those listening, I know you're thinking, oh, you're using the word empathy again. Yes, I've used the word empathy. I've been using it for years, but but please know, like, now is the time, and you have to bring, like, whatever empathy we all have, we have to bring it to the table more than we ever have. It's not just a good idea; it's necessary now. So I just and this is just with family, with friends, and of course within the workplace. So I think it's going to be an amazing year. There's going to be big things. We'll announce our big things as the goes on,
Yes.
and I want everyone else, go get what you love, set your soul on fire, whatever that might be. And like Sonia said earlier, it's uh, could be small things, could be things that have just been on your mind that you haven't been focused on. It could be some relationships that need mending. It could be job changes that you want to make. I mean, that it is true. Life passes us by pretty quickly, and you know, seize the moment, love what you do every day, and set that fire in your soul. So, as always, any final words from you before we?
No, I think you've captured it perfectly. I hope everyone, spends the next few days reflecting, thinking about big things ahead, thinking about what's really going to fulfill you, and let's enjoy the ride together as much as we can. And for any of you, that don't know Dan or I, like, definitely please feel free to reach out. Like I mentioned, he and I met, like, I literally messaged him after Al Adamson had one of his people analytics and future work virtual conferences. And look,
Yeah,
so you never know where you can find, that joint passion connection. And so just thank you all for joining us. Wishing you just the absolutely most incredible 2024, whatever that looks like for you. And if you'd like to cross paths again, you can find us on LinkedIn mostly. Yeah.
and yes, and yeah, well said. Thank you, everyone, and just have an incredible holiday season, and take time with family and rest, and we will see you in 2024 in the big year. And thank you always for your friendships, and it's a pleasure.
Mm,
I can't wait until for 2024 and the years ahead.
yeah, same here. Thank you, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.